Hello, you are viewing the Application Preparation Assistance webinar for the Capital Area Council of Governments Solid Waste Program for fiscal years 2024 and 2025. The webinar will cover details of the request for applications that was published on Monday, November 13th, and will give guidance in completing the application form for organizations interested in applying for a solid waste grant. I'm Ken May, Solid Waste Program Manager at CAPCOG. CAPCOG operates its solid waste program through a grant from the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality, or TCEQ. The CAPCOG solid waste program involves planning, such as assisting counties with adoption of landfill siting ordinances, environmental laws, which includes training for law enforcement personnel and maintaining a hotline to report illegal dumping, and finally, awarding grants to local governments for a variety of solid waste projects. The grant program coincides with the state biennial budgeting calendar. Therefore, every 2 years, CAPCOG publishes a request for applications, or RFA, and local governments in the 10-county region can apply for grants to fund solid waste projects. The current RFA was published on November 13th and is for grants that will be awarded in fiscal year 2024. Projects funded under this RFA will be performed in either fiscal year 2024 or fiscal year 2025. The total amount that CAPCOG has available to award in this grant is $274,000. A complete timeline of events in the grant application and review process can be found in the RFA document. The most important dates are: the deadline for submitting an application to CAPCOG is December 18th. The last day that a prospective applicant can ask a question in time to get a response, and for that question to be included in the question and answer document published on the CAPCOG website, is December 11th. In some cases, a resolution from the applicant is required to accompany the application. It is preferable for the resolution to be included at the time the application is submitted, but the RFA allows for the resolution to be provided after the application deadline date, as late as January 12th. January 19th, the CAPCOG Solid Waste Advisory Committee, or SWAC, will review all grant applications and make recommendations of funding projects to the CAPCOG Executive Committee. Then on February 14th, the CAPCOG Executive Committee will consider the SWAC's recommendations and make the final decision on the grant requests. The question and answer period, application deadline, and resolution requirement will be covered in more detail later in this webinar. If you've participated in the CAPCOG Solid Waste Grant Program before, you may notice some differences in this year's RFA. The main differences include a required cash match. Applicants have always voluntarily provided a match, but this year a match will be required for all projects. Minimum and maximum requested amounts. All applicants must be for an amount that is between these limits. An application for a collection event must include only one event. Multiple applications for events will be accepted. The method to submit applications is different, and this webinar, added to assist prospective applicants in preparing applications, is new this year. An additional change is being required by the TCEQ is that collection events projects must now have liability insurance. In addition to the guidance we are providing in this webinar, you can find the RFA document, which includes all requirements, on the CAPCOG website. Questions about the requirements for the RFA should be emailed to Andrew Hoeksema, AHOEKZEMA @capcog.org, with copies to the other two email addresses indicated here. If the email is received on or before December 11th, we will respond with an email answer and will include the question and its answer in the Q&A document with all other questions received. The document can be found on the CAPCOG website using the QR code shown. It will be updated periodically, with the last update occurring on December 12th. Entities that are eligible to apply for and receive a solid waste grant are the same as the grant program for the last biennium. They are municipalities, counties, public schools and school districts, not including universities, and other general and special law districts with the authority and responsibility for water quality protection or municipal solid waste management, including river authorities. There are 9 project categories eligible to be funded by a solid waste grant. Descriptions of each category begin at the bottom of page 2 of the RFA document. The descriptions list any requirements or limitations, if there are any, for that category. 9 project categories are: 1. Local enforcement. 2. Litter and illegal dumping cleanup and community collection events. 3. Source reduction and recycling. 4. Local solid waste management plans. 5. Municipal solid waste facilities eligible for funding. 6. Household hazardous waste management. 7. Technical studies. 8. Educational and training projects. And 9. Other types of projects. Although not listed on this slide, other projects that do not fit into any of the listed categories may be permitted. One example of an other type of project is an organic waste diversion program. The application form, which we will review later this webinar, includes space to indicate the category of project. Solid waste grant applications submitted to CAPCOG must include a funding request of at least $10,000. The funding request must also be no more than $40,000. The cash match is required for every project. At least 10% of the total cost of the project must be paid for by the applicant and will not be reimbursable by grant funds. The application form includes a table in which the required match amount can be calculated. There is no limit to the number of applications that any applicant can submit. Note that each project must be in a separate application. When the grant applications are reviewed by the SWAC, they will be reviewed relative to the project category priorities that have been established by the SWAC. The project categories have been grouped into 3 priority levels. A description of levels and rules for prioritization is provided at the bottom of page 13 of the RFA document. Applicants can submit more than one application in any project category. CAPCOG will place each application in a priority level based on the rules indicated in the prioritization of grant applications prior to scoring section of the RFA. Projects in priority level 1 will be funded before projects in priority level 2. Projects in priority level 2 will be funded before projects in priority level 3. Although it is not specifically required by the RFA, it is strongly suggested for applicants to indicate a preference for each application they submit. That is, for the most preferred application, the applicant should indicate a preference of 1. For the next most preferred application, a preference of 2 should be indicated, and so on. If preference is not indicated for an application, CAPCOG will prioritize applications based on the date and time the application was received. The applicant's preference becomes especially important when the applicant has more than one application in the same priority level. As stated previously, applications can contain no more than one collection event per application. An applicant can submit applications for more than one event. They will just need to be in separate applications. A multi-day event can be considered a single event if there is no break in the days of the event. For example, if a collection occurs on a consecutive Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, then it is considered one event. If it occurs on consecutive weekends, but not the intervening weekdays, it would be considered two events and would not be able to be included in one application. If an applicant is submitting applications for more than one collection event, it is especially important that they indicate preferences for the projects as previously stated, such as which one is most preferred, then next preferred, and so forth. Again, it is strongly suggested for this to be done for all applications. The application form is a separate document from the RFA document. The application form can be found on the solid waste page of the CAPCOG website. A link to the page and a QR code for it was shown on slide 5 of this webinar. The application form is a protected Microsoft Word document that includes spaces where applicants need enter information. Other parts of the document cannot be altered. There are several questions on the form that require the applicant to make a choice from several options. Although the form will allow more than one checkbox to be selected, applicants must only choose one box for such questions. The form does not include any questions where more than one choice is expected. Pages 2 and 3 of the form contain tables where the applicant is to enter financial information about the project. Values in the table, such as the total project cost or match percentage, are not calculated automatically. The applicant will need to calculate the values and enter them into the tables. The form must be saved in Word format, and when sent to CAPCOG should be named using the convention organization name, then the words solid waste grant application, then a sequential number for the application. If the applicant is submitting only one application, then the number to add to the end of the file would be 1. Although not required, it is suggested that the number at the end of the file name is the same one used for the project preference. I will now go over the steps to completing the application. The first section of the application is where basic information about the applicant needs to be entered. Space is provided for the name and address of the entity applying to be entered. The entity's organization type must also be shown from the options: municipality, county, school district, or other. The name, title, email address, and phone number of the person who will be the contact for the application must be entered. The person indicated as the contact will be who CAPCOG emails or calls for all matters relating to the application. This section of the form also has a place where the applicant must enter a name for the project. The name can be anything the applicant chooses and should be short and descriptive of the project. It will be used to identify the project at times when spoken or written. Page 1 of the application is also where the project category is indicated. All 9 possible options are included. The applicant must choose one, and only one, of these options in each application. The categories are shown here, grouped by their priority groups. Although the categories are shown in groups, the applicant must choose only one of the 9 total options. More information about the priority groups was provided on slide 10 of this webinar. Below the project category selection part is where applicants must indicate that the project does or does not include construction. One of these boxes must be chosen. Most projects are selected for funding and involve construction, will likely be programmed into the first fiscal year, and will have a longer period in which to complete the project. The top part of page 2 of the application form includes a table where the applicant enters the amount being requested. The first thing that needs to be entered into the table is the total project cost. For that reason, it is suggested that the applicant complete the project summary on page 3 of the application first, so that the total project cost can be determined, and then return to this section to enter the total project cost and finish the funding request table. After the total project cost is added, the applicant must enter the amount of grant fund that is being requested for the project. The amount requested must not be lower than $10,000 nor greater than $40,000. Additionally, the amount requested cannot be more than 90% of the total project cost. The next line is where the proposed amount of match is entered. To get the proposed match amount, the amount requested must be subtracted from the total project cost. Next, the match percentage is calculated by dividing the match amount by the total project cost, and then it is entered in the space provided. The match percentage must be equal to or greater than 10%. Line E is where the applicant must enter the minimum amount acceptable to perform the proposed project. Although it appears to be part of the table that is used to calculate the match amount and rate above it, this line is not calculated. The applicant should simply enter the least amount that it would be willing to receive in grant funds and still be able to accomplish the project. This amount is used when reviewing applications and helps in getting some projects funded when there is not enough money remaining to fund entire projects. The amount entered here must also be at least $10,000 and no more than the requested amount entered on line B above. The next section is where a full description of the project will be entered. The description should give the reviewers a good understanding of the project that is proposed. Some guidelines that are included in the section on the form are intended to help the applicant provide information relevant to the category of the project being proposed. Detailed information about costs is not necessary here, as it will be entered into the budget details section, which appears later in the application. The space to enter the project description appears small on the application, but the space will expand as content is entered into it. The project timeline is found immediately after the project description. In the timeline, the applicant must enter all important milestones of the project, such as dates equipment is procured, construction completion dates, billing dates, dates that events will be held, and similar occurrences. The milestones must be listed in order in which they occur. A suggested good entry for the first milestone in the timeline would be Notice to Proceed from CAPCOG received. The second column, titled Days from Receipt of Notice to Proceed, is where to indicate the number of days the applicant expects the milestone to occur relative to the date the notice to proceed was issued. For example, if the applicant enters Notice to Proceed from CAPCOG on the first line, then the column to the right of that entry should state 0. As each entry is made in a row of the timeline, the number of days after the notice to proceed needs to be entered. Each number in the right column must be higher than the one in the row immediately above it. The last milestone in the timeline is already entered. It is Final Request for Reimbursement submitted to CAPCOG. Like for the other lines, the applicant must enter a number of days in the right column that expects to request reimbursement after the notice to proceed is issued. When we were reviewing the funding request table on slide 15 earlier in this webinar, we suggested that applicants complete the project budget summary first. The project budget summary is the next section in the form, and it is where all project expenses are entered and added together to get the total project cost. To complete the project budget summary, the amount for each budget category must be entered on the line provided for the category. Page 7 of the RFA document includes descriptions of each budget category and provides guidance regarding which expenses are eligible and which are not eligible to be included in the budget of the project. Ineligible expenses and the value of any in-kind services must be excluded from the amounts entered here. One important thing to point out is the difference between supplies and equipment. Supplies typically refer to consumable items that have a relatively short period of usefulness, such as paper. Equipment is typically machinery and other goods having a useful life longer than 1 year. However, any item that would normally be considered equipment but has an acquisition cost of less than $5,000 must be considered supplies for the purposes of this grant application. Indirect expenses are allowed to be part of the budget. The RFA document indicates what documentation is required if indirect expenses are incurred. For examples of types of expenses that may be appropriate under each project category, prospective applicants should refer to page 9 of the RFA document. Whereas the project budget summary section lists all of the project's costs associated with each budget category, the project budget details section is where the applicant enters more detailed information about the expenses. The description entered here must include all the costs that were entered in the table above. If there are any ineligible expenses or in-kind services that are involved in the project but could not be included in the budget summary above, the applicant must describe them here. The spaces will expand as content is entered. If an amount is not entered for a category in the project budget summary table, then the applicant does not need to enter anything for that category in the project budget details section. If the applicant organization's own policy requires it to adopt a resolution before the grant application can be submitted, then the adopted resolution must be provided as part of the application. The application must indicate if a resolution is required by checking either the yes or the no box on the top of page 5 of the application form. If no is checked, then there is nothing further the applicant needs to do regarding providing a resolution. If the applicant checks yes, then the applicant either includes a copy of the adopted resolution with the submitted application form, or indicates the date that the governing body of the applicant is expected to adopt the resolution. If the resolution is going to be provided to CAPCOG later, it must be provided no later than January 12, 2024. Next part of the application form does not require the applicant to put any information. The Certification and Assurances section discloses all the certifications and assurances being made by the applicant by submitting the application. All should be read thoroughly prior to preparation of the application. Prior to submitting the application, most projects will require the applicant to comply with the private industry notification requirements. Applicants should refer to the Requirements for Private Industry Notification section near the bottom of page 10 in the RFA document for the guidelines to comply with this requirement. Once the application form is complete and all additional required materials are available, the applicant may submit the application to be considered for grant funding. Applications will be accepted up until 4 p.m. on December 18, 2023. Applications must include the completed application form, documentation of private industry notification, the resolution, if applicable and available, and the indirect cost plan if indirect costs are included in the project budget. To submit the application, applicants must send an email with all required materials to CAPCOG Deputy Executive Director Andrew Hoeksema at ahoekzema@capcog.org with copies to Ken May and Charles Simone. All three email addresses are indicated on this slide as well as in the RFA document. Each application being submitted by an applicant must be in its own email. That is, if an applicant is submitting 2 applications, it will then send 2 emails with 1 application each. The subject line for the email must be in the format of the organization's name, then the words Solid Waste Grant Application, and then the sequel number of the application. This is the same format that was described in slide 12 of this webinar for naming the application form and document. When CAPCOG receives an email with an application, it will send a response confirming that the application has been received. If an applicant sends an application and does not receive a confirmation email by 5 p.m. on the deadline date of December 18th, the applicant should contact Andrew Hoeksema as soon as possible to make sure that the application gets received by CAPCOG so that the project can be considered for grant funding. Thank you for viewing our webinar. I'm Ken May.
This concludes the Application Preparation Assistance webinar for CAPCOG's Solid Waste Grant Program for fiscal years 2024 through 2025. We hope that the information provided in the webinar will be beneficial as you prepare a request for grant funding for your project. We covered many of the requirements of the program and the steps to complete an application. You should also review the RFA document to get a thorough understanding of the grant program. For more information about the Solid Waste Management Plan for the 10-county capital area, please read the Regional Solid Waste Management Plan. If your email address is not currently in CAPCOG's mailing list for solid waste news and information, you can request to be added by sending an email with the subject line, "Please include my address in solid waste mailing list."